Hello, everyone. It's your boy Jeff, and this is not a record-related video or a music-related video. So, if that's what you're here for to watch on my channel, turn back now. This is a revival of sorts of one of my dormant side projects that I've been working on, which is the Stephen King reading project. Now, it's been a while since I've done a video like this. With the way the world's been and with as much work as I've had to do, my reading time has kind of suffered. But nevertheless, for those of you who are patient and who enjoyed this series, I got 3 books to talk about. Yeah, it's been a while. So just as a quick recap for those of you who may not know what this is, what I did starting last year was decide to finish reading all of the Stephen King material that I hadn't read yet, which consisted of several books, and alternating that with rereading books of his that I had read and really enjoyed. But, you know, in a lot of these cases, it's been 30 plus years since I read them the first time. So it's like reading a brand new book in a way. So when I left off, and I'll just get to the first book right now, is Pet Sematary. This was a book that I had read before back in like 7th grade, 8th grade. So it had to be, it was the paperback, so it was the year after this came out. So it must have been like 84, because Pet Sematary came out in 83. And reread this one several months ago. And where to start with this thing? If any of you King aficionados happen to watch the Horror Show channel, you'll know that Fuego does his Hail to Stephen King segments on the Horror Show channel on YouTube. And this is one of his favorite books, if not his very favorite King book. It's not my very favorite because it admittedly was kind of a tough read, but very enjoyable. And there's a lot of great writing in this book, especially for a book this old, you know, that's already been adapted, I think, 2 times. I'm really not going to worry about spoilers. So if you've never read this book or seen any of the movies, sorry. But when the basic premise is that this family moves to a house, of course, in Maine, and they live not too far from a pet cemetery. And what lurks beyond that pet cemetery, deeper in the woods, is a Indian burial ground that revives or reanimates whomever you bury there. So, of course, the family has a cat, as you can see from the cover, and the cat gets hit by a truck. And so in a, I don't know if it's like a lark or whatnot, the dad, Lewis Creed, buries the cat in the Indian burial ground, and sure enough, it comes back to life. Not the same as it was when it was alive, but it was alive. So they have a very young boy named Gage. You kind of see where it's going here. Unfortunately, Gage gets hit also by, you know, these tanker trucks that zoom by their house every day. And in his grief, and that's one of the best, probably one of the best pieces of King's writing, I think, ever, lurks in this book. It's the segment where the dad is digging up the fresh grave of his boy Gage, and King takes you into this very long internal dialogue that he has with himself while he's digging, and you know, removing Gage from his coffin and taking him to the burial ground and burying him, reburying him there. Very dark, very kind of twisted. Um, a way of dealing with grief, and um, it's hard to read, but it's good writing. Just the subject matter is pretty, but needless to say, Gage comes back. It's not the same Gage as he was when he was alive. In fact, people who come back from these um, reanimations are pretty doggone evil. So um, the book really doesn't pick up towards the end like most King. It's kind of a slow start. You know, you're kind of getting to know these characters. It takes its time. Even though it's not a very long book, it's one of his shorter novels. But yeah, Gage comes back and he does some very bad things, unfortunately. So um, I liked it. It was one of his harder reads, I have to say, but it was a very good story, and I wouldn't rank this like in my top five or maybe even top 10, but probably top 15 out of his 60 or so books. It's it's good. It's worth reading, and King actually hesitated publishing this initially because the subject matter came very close to home for him because one of his kids was almost hit by a truck, which kind of was the inspiration for this story. But yeah, this is a messed up book. And that's saying a lot for Stephen King. If you have to say that this is really a messed up book, and from King, it really means something. Trust me. um, then after Pet Sematary, I went back and picked up Lisey's story. This was a book of his that I'd never read before. I think this one came out during my King ban. Yeah, the whole Dark Tower thing ended badly for me. Even though I kind of want to reread like the first four books again, I don't really want to read all of them over again, just the first four. But yeah, this came out in 2006, and there's really nothing on the back cover. But and this is a pretty long book. This one took a while. This one took me a while to get through. And I remember in interviews that I saw, recent interviews with King, he named this book as his favorite, among his favorites. So after reading it, I kind of had a hard time figuring out why, because this book reminded me a lot of Doomickey, which was a book that was a very tough read for me because I didn't really like the characters a whole lot, and the story didn't take off until past the halfway point of the book, and that was a very long book too. That was like 600 some pages. I think this is in like the 500 range. Kind of had the same problem with this book too. I'm not gonna lie. It's Lisey is the wife of a famous novelist who ends up dying, and she has like his whole um, vast store of works to be archived. You know, his other writings and everything that's he never published, and stories and novels and this and that. And she ends up dealing with this guy who's trying to blackmail her essentially to get at some of the material of her husband for publishing purposes and archiving purposes for their college. that's kind of how the story starts. So we get these long passages, of Lisi with her husband Scott, him doing the author thing, giving talks and learning about him and getting to know him. Not super interesting, but not bad, I guess. That's kind of what made it a tough go. And then, kind of halfway through this book, it takes kind of a left field turn, and we learn how Scott was able to, like, teleport himself, I guess, is about the best word I can think of, to like this. It's like an alternate dimension or a pocket dimension or something. And of course, it being king, some very malevolent things lurk there. Hard to explain, but this is another one of those books that starts one way and then completely veers off in another way. So over the course of time, Lisi figures out how to, I guess, transport herself there too, because she doesn't have her husband anymore. So she figures out how to do it too. And this guy who is trying to actually kill her towards the end of the book, it starts as blackmail, and then it turns out he's trying to kill her. She ends up transporting the two of them into this dimension, and she's able to leave him there with some of the very bad things that come out at night in that dimension. That's your basic plot right there. Yeah, and it takes a long time to get there. So I rank this one kind of below Doomickey. It didn't grab me as hard as that book did once it got going. So it took me a while to get through this one. But I want to be able to say I've read every single King book. So I stuck with it. That's why it's been a while since I've made these videos. Yeah, I can't rank this very highly among his catalog of books. This would probably be in the lower, echelons of his writing for me. Didn't really care for it a whole lot. I mean, King being King, there's a certain level of quality there, but the story just didn't really work for me, and the characters just didn't really work for me either, sad to say. It seems like the 2000s, like the mid to late 2000s, I think King was in a rut or something, because a lot of the books that came out in that time period are not among my favorite reads by King. And I still have a story collection of his called Full Dark No Stars, which is going to be, I think, the last new King that I haven't read yet. So I was glad to at least be able to say I read this and put it on the shelf. So, but it's really not among my favorites. Then I kind of, whenever a new King book comes out, I read it as soon as I'm able to. So this also falls into the category of new King that I haven't read because it just came out. This is a story collection of his called If It Bleeds, and brand new. Sorry for all the glare. And it's a collection of 4 novellas that, like Full Dark No Stars, which I have to finish, or Different Seasons, or 4 Past Midnight. It seems like King likes to do that every so often. And this continues in that tradition. For basically like 3 almost novellas, I suppose. They're probably like 100 pages or so each, and 1 really, really long mini novel. So just finished this one last week. And I right off the bat, I enjoyed it. I'm not going to be as spoilery with this one because it's brand new, so I'm not going to give you too many details. But let me just say, I'll look at the story titles. The first one was Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which I thought was a little bit more of a sophisticated take on like an EC Comics horror story, like Tales from the Crypt type of thing. That's kind of the way it struck me, just not as comic booky. You know, King refines it a little bit. That's the thing I got. It's basically about this kid who's working for this very old, rich gentleman in town. He ends up dying, and the kid is able to call the old man's cell phone and leave him messages. I'm not going to say anything more beyond that, but it was good. I enjoyed it. The second story was called The Life of Chuck. That one was like a series of 3 different little short stories told in reverse order, and that's probably the hardest of the 4 to explain. But it just he refers to Walt Whitman in this story, in Leaves of Grass, when Walt Whitman says that he contains multitudes. That's kind of the theme for that story, Life of Chuck. I know you're like, what the hell are you telling me, Jeff? Just read it and see what you think. It was okay. It was good. The really big long story is the title story, If It Bleeds. And if you had read King's novel of a couple of years ago called The Outsider, that story, If It Bleeds, is a direct sequel to that story, and to a lesser degree the Bill Hodges trilogy of books. It deals with Holly. He seems to really like the character of Holly Gibney, who was a main character in all of those novels. And this is like her first solo outing, if you will, with King. It's all centered on her. And like I said, if you read The Outsider, this is a really direct sequel to that book because Holly comes across another outsider. So, like I said, I'm not going to get spoilery. If you guys have read that book, you'll know what I'm talking about. So, it was enjoyable. I like that one quite a lot. I like Holly. I like that character. It feels like, though, that King is spinning his wheels a little bit too much with this one. He's kind of like retreading the same ground, so to speak. I'd like to see him branch out a little bit with this character, maybe think of something else to write about with her. But it was still enjoyable to read. And the 4th story in this book is called Rat. And of course, once again, it's about an author because that's what Stephen King knows. So a lot of his characters are all authors. Struggling to write a novel. Moves up to their cabin that their family has in northern Maine, which is real isolated. And he has a dream about a rat, a talking rat. And the rat helps him finish his first novel. But the price that the rat charges him to complete that task is really not good. So there you go. I'll leave it there. Overall, I like this book. It seems to fall into the same pattern as his recent books have been, like The Institute, that just came out last year, and The Outsider, and so on, going back. They're solid reads, but they're not mind-blowing. They're just good storytelling, very readable. You don't really get too bored with them. At least I haven't. But there's no big scares. There's no big, like, grand concepts like there was, like, even with Pet Sematary. Something that King really dives deep on and plays with. it King spinning his wheels is better than a lot of authors doing their best work. So there's that, at least to me. I enjoyed this book. It's definitely worth reading. If you're a King fan, you should like it just fine. And like I said, it falls into that tradition of his novella collections, which a lot of which contain really strong writing, and this basically falls in that same pattern. So If It Bleeds was out of the three books that I've talked about, this would probably be my favorite one, with Pet Sematary being a close second. But Lisi's story, sorry guys, sorry. So there you go. Three books. Thank you for waiting so long to see if I was ever going to make another one of these, because I wasn't sure for a while. But I seem to have been rekindled with my interest in reading King again. I seem to have a little more time on my hands to do so. So that's what I'm going to do. Right now, I just started rereading The Shining. That's another book that I haven't read since like the early 80s. So I just saw the movie version of Dr. Sleep, which was the sequel to The Shining. And I like that movie. It was pretty faithful to the book. It kind of veered off, towards the end, that I didn't really know if I cared for all that much. But overall, I like the acting in it, and I thought it was mostly faithful to the Dr. Sleep novel. So that kind of made me want to go back even further and reread The Shining. So that's where I'm at right now. And then after that will be the final book of King's that I'd never read before, which I mentioned earlier, which is called Full Dark No Stars. That's another 4-story collection. And I read the first story, I know, and then I started the second one, and I ended up putting the book down. So I'm going to give that another shot. I'm going to force my way through it if I have to, just like I did with Lisi's story. And then I'll be able to say that I've read everything of King, and he's written over 60 books. So, and then from there, there's several others that I want to reread. And once I'm done with new King books, I'm going to alternate them with Joe Hill's books, which is Stephen King's son. I've read like 3 of his books so far, and I ended up picking up all of the other ones that I haven't read. So I've got the Joe Hill catalog. So once I finish reading New King, I'll alternate with rereading Old King and Joe Hill until I work my way through that. So I've got everything pretty well mapped out for now. And thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, thank you. Appreciate it. And love y'all. And I should be back soon with another record video. So until then, peace. Stephen King rules. And I'll see you soon.